Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Happy Dystopian. I'm here again today with Ferdi. Ferdi, how are you doing?
Hey everyone, yes, I'm doing great on this clear skied Sunday. What's not to like about it? Happy to be here again and talk to you about the interesting topics that we've talked about before, and also some new things maybe.
Yeah, a lot has happened, to be sure. So perhaps to start, because we are the Happy Dystopian, I would like to describe a very romantic moment I had this morning.
All right.
I was driving into town from the east direction,
Mm-hmm.
and I took the route where you go from the highway into the center.
Right.
You just gradually slow down, and you pass all those great buildings,
Yeah.
maybe the ministry buildings, but also you pass underneath some buildings that have been built on top of the highway, so to
Yeah, at
speak.
the central station.
Yeah, so I was blasting We Built This City by Starship. And then as I drove under one of those bridges, there was a sign or some graffiti artist put up, Huur is duur. In other words, the rent is unaffordable.
Right. Yes, I think we also saw that when we came back from Antwerp some time ago. Yeah.
So it really gave me a feeling of like being in a movie, of being part of a big city with hundreds of thousands of people, all struggling together, all those different things that are going on. So very interesting
Yeah,
feeling.
so you see like the skyline of The Hague, the political heart and center of the Netherlands where it all happens for us, but then you also see a sign of underlying problems being clad on the highway.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the seat of the Dutch government, but also the motto is peace and justice. So it's
Right.
all international law, which is taken very seriously here. Bit of a losing battle, if you ask me, but
Yeah.
it's still something which is taken seriously here. But then also all of the stuff happening in the big city problems, the neighborhood where we are now, it's known as a hotbed of criminal activity. It's an open secret, the drug dealing, the money laundering, and also all of the migration stuff taking place here. It's a bit of a gray area. There's some seasonal laborers who are housed here in too small housing. But then there's also the human trafficking. There's really a lot going on. Then 1 kilometer away from here, you see the area where the political Islam is getting its foothold in the Netherlands. It's that's also going on. So a lot happening to a few 100,000 people in this small place. So glad to be a part of it, and to
In that
struggle
beautiful
together.
process. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Yeah. So very interesting. So I thought something good to start off with.
Well, partly good.
Yeah.
Mixed feelings, but bittersweet. That's life.
Interesting. Yeah, like a movie. A movie should not only be positive. There's
Right.
also some
That's
challenges
True. That's true.
involved. So perhaps we can at first discuss a bit more about the topic which we have been talking about a lot, which is central bank policy. Last time I was sort of cautiously optimistic about some sort of hawkish comments by the ECB. However, since then they have announced that after the pandemic emergency purchasing program, there will be another program,
Right.
permanent this time. And then in addition to this, the Germans have gone to have voted for a new government, which is currently being constructed. And they've already stated that they will be looking for the loopholes in the tax and in the spending clauses in their constitution. Well, as you will remember, the Germans had a very traumatic experience in the 1920s with hyperinflation, which led to political unrest, which then led to the Third Reich and the Second World War and etc. So Germany has traditionally been very averse to fiscal expansion and fiscal irresponsible behavior, but it seems that even the Germans nowadays cannot be trusted anymore.
Yeah.
How do you view these developments?
Yeah, well, it's like you say, and we discussed that the previous time, the signaling by the ECB on the pandemic program, the PEP, and on scaling it down somewhere starting in 2022. it was the least thing they could do, but I didn't expect either that they would then in the month after bring up this idea of a new tool which they will permanently consider using, which is the new asset purchase program, which will it has been embraced by the ECB, while it is actually a crisis tool only used in unconventional times actually. The thing that makes it more obvious the direction that the ECB is taking is when you now look at the other central banks around Europe and around the US. The Federal Reserve is tempering down the purchase programs way faster in any case, and even they are considering a rate hike by now, because due to the inflation also occurring, it's the obvious thing to do to save purchasing power. The Bank of Russia has already done multiple rate hikes. Japan has announced that it will totally stop buying more assets under their large-scale asset purchase program starting in 2022, to a complete stop rather than just scaling down. Bank of England is now seriously considering rate hikes, but in Europe it's taboo to talk about it, even though the German representative at the ECB has resigned over this issue, that the most people in the council are still not considering a rate hike in this time of very fast and quickly increasing inflation, which does not seem to be transitory but rather persistent over at least the coming few years. That everyone is scratching their heads now, and what direction are we taking? Why won't we budge on the interest rate? Why are we embracing this new tool of monetary expansion again, even though we know and have said that it's not healthy to do for a longer period of time?
So that was a bit of a spicy news, that Jens Weidmann is his name, I believe, the German representative at the ECB. He resigned citing personal reasons, but also gave some comments. And perhaps it's also in the light of the new government being constructed in Germany that he wants to give the new government opportunity to appoint someone new. But it's definitely a sign of the times, and another somewhat hawkish voice lost in the ECB.
Yeah, and I think regarding the German domestic political situation, it's not weird to expect this new coalition to really desire the access to these unlimited funds streaming from Frankfurt, from the ECB. Even though that Germany was traditionally more a conservative fiscal player in that council. But I think the critical element that's missing here is, Mutti Merkel and the CDU, which is a conservative party in Germany and is now missing from the negotiations. So if they succeed, the SDP and the FDP and the Greens, if they succeed in creating a government, then of course they're going to appeal to that tool again.
They have huge ambitions which need to be financed.
Exactly, and their opponent, the CDU, has exploited this stream of funds while being in power. So that's not something that they are going to want to miss, because that means austerity.
Yeah, that would mean, you had your fun, but...
But now that we're in power, we're going to show you what fun is.
Yeah, exactly.
That's politically logical.
So just a small step from the monetary policy to the effects which we are witnessing now. We already saw it in the housing prices for a long time, and rent increases, etc. But now the natural gas has taken a central stage, which with a huge price increase.
Right.
So we are all really noticing the higher prices. Do you think this will spark some change in the policy?
Well, that's difficult to say, because it's difficult to say what the division of power really is within the council. It has to be, of course, predominantly hawkish in order to get real rate hikes that have any effect. And as of now, that just does not seem likely. Also because most member states are probably worried about what will happen if they increase the rates of interest. Regarding the gas prices, it's of course a primary reason why you should increase the interest rates, because it's going to increase inflation all across the board. Gas prices, they create a large part of the cost price for any product due to shipping, but also due to transport over the road or people having to go to work.
Electricity.
Electricity for buildings, you know, you name it, and it has some part of it is coming from gas prices. And they're going up so fast now. Oil at the station in the highway is now well over €2 per liter, which is an increase of what, like maybe 20-25% from like half a year ago.
Yeah.
And that's going to be noticeable. So it is time for an interest rate hike, but will it happen? How long can we hold out?
So one thing is the gasoline, but another thing is the natural gas, of course, which has increased even more.
Yeah.
So all the European member states are taking their own measures. So the French are saying we're going to cap the price of natural gas, which is, if we can trust our experience from history, is not going to work. So there's going to be some serious problems with gas shortages. So in the Netherlands, we have said, okay, we're going to compensate all the households for their higher gas bill, higher natural gas bill. But then, of course, they are taking a one-size-fits-none approach, in which also a lot of people are going to get tax rebates, even though they are not suffering any increase in the cost due to a fixed contract, for instance. And the funny thing is that this measure is going to cost a lot of tax revenue to the government, which means they will have to borrow more, which means that the monetary expansion is going to go even further.
Yeah, so I think the gas crisis in that way also, you know, brings a panic into the national governments who are going to deal with huge budget shortages, because everything is becoming so much more expensive. And it's like you say, it's not just fuel in gasoline, but also gas for all the electricity produced. And it's not just in Europe, it's also in China. And in China, they've already seen like structured blackouts from certain sectors to save energy. And if that's something that we're going to experience in the coming year, that's going to mean like a necessary restructuring of the economy almost, because the efficiency that we have now, or had before the corona crisis, will just be unattainable. It's no longer possible, so people will have to surrender part of their purchasing power to such factors.
Yeah, it seems that just a small bridge to China. It seems that China will be the first domino block to fall.
Yeah.
We've talked last time about the Evergrande crisis. Talk is still ongoing. Are they going to default? They recently paid for one interest payment, so they haven't technically defaulted. On the other hand, in the coming months, some principal payments are also going to mature, and it's very doubtful if Evergrande will be able to pay those.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, I would say that it is pretty much beside the point at this moment. Many of the Evergrande suppliers have defaulted. Their competitors are in a problem. The housing market in many places in China is in a collapse. Right now, they are actually making a lot of videos of building sites where they have returned to work.
Right. The motivation for we're gonna make it.
Exactly. So they are really doing a lot of damage control, but I think in reality, it's for the impact on the wider economy, it's no longer relevant. Are they going to miss their payments or not? Because the problem is there.
Yeah, it's Evergrande is just one of many in China and other parts of the world which is in a similar situation, you know. A bubble of a market which has been created purely out of speculative reasons, because people thought, if I invest in a house, that's definitely going to go up in price by 15%. That's the best investment I can get for my buck. So it's that model that has also been dealt like a fatal blow, that people are no longer going to mindlessly just pump all their savings into new housing, in any case in China for now, because all that housing might not be finished and there's not even any demand for it.
Exactly.
So China has a 90% home ownership rate, and there's more than 100 million of unfinished homes which have no prospective buyer or renter.
Yeah.
So all that money, and we're talking about many trillions, it has been a delta blow, and it's going to seep out of it. While it's been one of the major contributors of Chinese economic growth, So like you say, it doesn't really matter if the Evergrande is going to default on its 300 billion debt, because the entire market is going to default. It's not going to be as profitable as it was, and that's going to hurt for very many people that put all their savings and more into it.
But that's something very interesting you point out, because the housing market in many places, also in most of Europe, is also getting incredibly expensive. But the flip side of that is that it only matters to those people who want to buy a house.
Yeah.
You know, and if that is just a small portion, and you are expecting that because those prices are skyrocketing that it's a huge investment, and you are not looking at the wider market, like, okay, but how many people are actually in the market to buy something
at this price? That's why we should remember that in the case of Europe, and especially the Netherlands, there's so much panic and the fear of missing out, which is really driving the price. Speculative behavior by individuals is of course part of that, because everyone with a lot of money doesn't want to pay taxes on it, but would rather have a return on it.
Yes.
But it's different from the Chinese situation, where there's buyers here, and in China there's not really any buyers except those who want to do it for speculative reasons. While we are still missing, like, it's 300,000 or something houses in order to also satisfy that need. So for us it's the fear of missing out, while in China it just seems to be greed and no real considerance of what you're buying and who you're going to sell it to, because there's nobody. And in here it's more about, I'm going to buy it at this price. Am I ever going to find someone that can afford that price?
Yes.
And that's probably not the case at this point, because that part of the market that's able to afford a 600,000 euro loan on a house is very small.
Yes, and it's getting smaller.
Yeah.
I mean, if a person buys a house now and has to sell it in 20 years' time, and if you look at the young people just entering the labor market, I mean, the salaries are low, conditions are bad, there's a lot of flexible labor, a lot of people forced to act as entrepreneurs. While they are
working
not,
on their own.
Yeah, exactly, like independent contractors earning a very low rate. That's a concern definitely for the future, and we're all tossing a bomb around and we're hoping that it doesn't blow up in our
Exactly, and the thing is, to tie it back to the ECB, is once they signal, like, to the banks who are giving out these mortgages for insane amounts, because the interest rate is low and the risk also seems low. Once the ECB signals, well, maybe in a year or two the interest rate will be above zero again, then the banks, their risk teams are going to make a calculation which is going to put even more people out of that group of potential buyers for those insane prices. And that's when shit's going down, because all the people up to now that have bought at those prices will take the loss, and they will be insolvent with their house.
Yeah, if you're like the house value is less than the outstanding mortgage, and that's
right,
that's
and
a tough
by
situation
a huge
to
amount,
be in.
right?
Yeah,
so not by an amount that you can pay back in maybe a year or two.
No,
but we're talking about 100,000 or something, which is
exactly
the average increase in expensive houses in this year alone. It's been 100,000.
It could go the other way, of course. And then if you're 100,000 short, then especially if you're forced to move by any reason, like you're getting divorced or something like that, it's going to be a tough situation.
That's going to be a costly change in your life, because you can't just if you get divorced and have to find something for yourself, well, you're never going to be able to buy something if you bought something on 2 salaries. So everyone's paying their outer budget, and once it flips, that will leave them all hanging.
And it's if you're renting as well. I mean, if I would move now, I'm currently renting, and I would move to another rental apartment, I would get a far worse deal than I have now. So it's very unfair, and it's also stopping people from moving. Everyone is keeping in their own place, and that's
and the same is for the social subsidized houses
Yeah,
that we
absolutely,
have
yeah.
a lot of. I think it outnumbers like the free renting sector like 3 to 1.
Yeah, by far, yeah. I think
So
that's about
all
half of the households are in the social
right,
housing. Yeah, right.
yeah, and all of those people they face like twice as much housing costs if they would go out.
Yeah,
So there's like you say this position where only 20% or something of people that are looking for a house are being played around by everyone
yes.
because everyone is just they've already found their chair and they're not going to stand up for you because that would leave them standing.
Yeah.
So it's
the,
an
the,
awkward
the
situation.
yeah, so the political goal is like to make sure that you divide the brunt of the damage over like a sufficiently small portion of the population.
Right, yeah, so they can't resist actively enough as a
So
group.
the main part of the population will still think everything is going fine and
A small minority carries the blunt of the issues of the housing market.
exactly, yeah. But it's interesting. We talked about this 3 weeks ago, and there's already been so much news in the meantime that it's a all different topic. So perhaps if we talk again in a month's time, it will be very interesting again. And I'm mainly looking forward to what happens if there's going to be a divergent path between the ECB and the rest of the world. So a lot of the smaller Western banks, as you say, have already hiked the interest rates. If the Federal Reserve is going to do that as well, do we have to follow, or will there still be room for a divergent European policy? And if there is, what kind of effect will that have?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, of course, the public stance has already diverted to some extent, also from the Fed and the ECB in the way they talk about the threat of inflation. But if the Fed is going to increase the interest rate, I wouldn't be able to say at this point whether the ECB would follow that and what exactly would happen would they not do that. Of course, there's always like capital flight, if the conditions become better somewhere else.
Oh, absolutely.
But maybe the anxiety will also prevent people to do that and rather just wait and see, right? Because they've not been treated very badly by the ECB thus far, that they're really wealthy entities like corporates and very rich individuals. They've only profited from the dovish stance, so it's still to say how much effect it will really have and how the ECB will respond, because of course they don't have to raise the interest, they can also just say other things or do other things.
Yes.
Maybe they will try something like that in order not to blow up like the real estate market.
Be like we're going to operate more restrictive, but trying not to appear that way.
Yeah, like they will say publicly like, oh yeah, we're going to scale down this program while now already having announced a new one. As signals of, we're also, scaling down on the expansion and we're trying to normalize the situation, but then never talk about the interest rate.
I mean, the strategy, the 4D chess is getting really interesting, eh?
Yeah.
I spoke to a banker some while back and I asked him if he was following the press conferences of the ECB, and he was saying, no, I don't really follow it, I just look at the interest rate and then I don't have to look at what they're saying.
Right. Yeah, but then the mission is achieved, right? Because of course the bankers fear the deposit facility rate, like how much does it cost for us to put our money at your bank in a stable position. So they don't want to know when the interest rate is going up, because they don't want the interest rate is going up. All the people I speak on that within the bank, within higher positions, they are all confident that it won't go up and that we will remain in these easy financial conditions for the coming time, forever. Yeah. But that's just not the truth. It's once inflation is like above 5%, it's no longer responsible to do that.
Yeah, then it will end either way. I mean,
it has to. I think that if the inflation persists among 2022, it has to happen there, because otherwise then savings for people will just disappear. They go up in smoke.
The last time the Fed had a serious hike in the 90s, it wasn't bad for the US at all, because it just meant that more money flowed from the rest of the world into the US. It did cause the Asian crisis back then, so it was bad for some upcoming emerging markets.
Yeah.
But for the US itself, I think could be okay.
Yeah, it's all about how dependent on access to easy finance.
Yes.
So I think in Europe, the party that is very dependent on the easy finance are currently the business sector, because they have already taken out so many loans under these conditions, which have been existing for 10 years now, that if you would rate the interest rates and they would have to pay these higher prices on their loans, so many of these companies would default by logic, because then they can no longer operate, because they need that credit and that cheap credit to reach like a certain margin. And I think that's the main fear now in Europe, that once the rate goes up, we will see a huge recession due to like firm defaults.
And don't forget about the sovereign debt as well. I mean, we had the euro crisis in 2012.
Yeah.
And it has not been solved.
No.
So that situation is about to return as well. I mean,
and last year or in this crisis, we've played around with the rules that we have imposed on nation states with their budgets. So it's going to be very hard to undo that, and in that way, try to tame the very expensive budgets of Southern Europe, for instance. It's going to be very hard to sell that to Southern Europe after this, because we've shown that it's not necessary, at least it doesn't seem necessary, to obey the laws of finance, as it were.
No, it's not necessary anymore. So absolutely. So a lot of interesting stuff going on the monetary side. Well, we are happy, but we're also dystopian.
Right.
And the main real life dystopia at this moment, in my point of view, is Red China. You wanted to say something about their situation?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time for East Asia right now, because things like Evergrande, but also just the economic malaise, with shipping and immense economic prices for gas and other resources on which China thrives, because itself it doesn't really have that much resources. I think it's a very interesting time to look at its political behavior towards Taiwan, because we've seen so many threatening news reports and so many press statements by China, that keeps emphasizing the one China policy where Taiwan doesn't exist. While Taiwan has also fiercely responded, showing that they're also kind of getting afraid of the tone that's being set by China. Of course, a very large part of the inflation and supply chain shortages we have seen is because of microconductors or semiconductors and microprocessors, of which Taiwan is the world's greatest, as it is. Greatest supplier of that worldwide. It's interesting to see now that there's so many issues on that topic that China is increasing its threatening behavior towards Taiwan. Also because of domestic problems like the Evergrande, it seems like it's time for China to focus on an external enemy with which they can distract their populace from the internal problems.
Rally behind the flag.
Right, rally behind the flag, and it's time for crisis, they are experiencing shortages of all kinds. They are in deep trouble regarding their debt for these real estate firms. And I think that Taiwan is right now looking so juicy for China that I'm kind of afraid that something may happen in the coming time.
Well, I think they may have squandered a really great opportunity during the whole Capitol riots thing going on in the US. I mean, it has now become clear that the highest ranking general, Mark Milley, actually had a hotline to his Chinese counterpart, promising them, no, we're not going to attack you no matter what our crazy president says. I think the US must have appeared so weak at that time that would have been a great opportunity to strike, but China didn't do it.
No, and I think China is rightfully also really afraid of what would happen if they did, which is the sparkle of hope for me that it might just fizzle down to nothing, because of course if they try to invade, everyone will know what the consequences are. Not only will Taiwan fall to China, but also the area will become a no-go zone for so much traffic. Japan, India, Australia, who are so dependent on traffic across that road.
Yeah, that will be disrupted for sure.
Yeah, they can't just stand by. Regarding the Capitol riots and general, it's just a sign of how much in disarray the entire apparatus has been in the U.S. since the Trump presidency. And China, of course, doesn't show those signs. They are more of a unitary actor than the U.S. will ever be now.
They're trying to appear as such.
Yes, of course. But it's still has an effect on how other entities view you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But in reality, also in China, there are deep divisions. I mean, their whole country, they have the core close to the sea. But then they have Inner Mongolia, Tibet and Xinjiang, which are all very different culturally and also economically from the Chinese center. So I don't think they are any less divided than the US
that's
or
true,
Europe.
but it's just the flow of information within and without the country is just so different, because for the US, the Republican-Democrat opposition is almost a way of life.
Yes.
But in China, in the East Coast, they're not going to talk about the rebelling region of Xinjiang or Tibet or something. Maybe sometimes about Taiwan, because that's like a national objective now.
Yes.
But the other ones, they don't consider it. They consider it China, and they're told that they're Chinese.
Yes.
And that there's no problem, only just some
And
bad
the
actors.
The Chinese totalitarian system is like the best one in human history.
Yeah.
It's incredible how they are using all the latest technologies to be even more repressive and
gunning both in the national level but also the international level.
Yeah, it's almost admirable.
Yeah, no, well, it is definitely admirable from a state point of view. But
we can say a few things about the CCP, but they're not crazy, they're not stupid, and they are not incompetent. I mean,
they're not.
For sure.
They're not. I mean, they might make errors like we do.
Like everyone does.
But they are of a certain disposition, I think, that we don't like in our administrators, which is, always calculating, always gunning for, personal power, and always with this realpolitik kind of attitude towards everyone, which, you and I may appreciate a lot, but in our current political systems, it's no longer appreciated.
Yeah, but what I'm even more scared of is not China itself, because they are very active, of course, in their own corner of the world. What I'm actually more scared of is how positive the Western leaders are viewing the Chinese system, and are going to try to take a page out of their playbook. We've already seen that with the QR codes for your vaccination status. But then also there's a lot of other things which Western leaders could take as an example. The facial recognition cameras, the social credit system.
Yeah, we just want to learn from it.
Exactly.
Which is really disgusting. And I think you're very right in saying that it's very weird that despite all these things happening in China and being shown on the news, that there's never a public pushback against it. And never some attempt to criticize or condone these people who are behind it. Is it only because of the economic gains for the nation states, or is something else going on? And are these Chinese powers affecting our domestic discourse, on the topic? That's what I'm a bit afraid of, is why are they not criticizing China?
Well, I mean, China has a lot of economic firepower, which they manage to use to influence, to dispense influence at a lot of different levels. Also at the individual level, when a celebrity speaks out against China, he's immediately faced with financial effects of that.
Yeah, but that's the evil attitude, as it were. Of course, the US also does that with their money, but it seems to have gone to all levels, like you say, individual and state level and firm level, which makes it so pervasive that you don't really see it.
I mean, if for instance the Guardian would become very critical of China, then China could respond by not allowing the Guardian to be active in their area at all, and that would have a large financial impact.
I had hoped that there would be plenty of people and firms and also nation states that would do so despite that, because the public would ask for it, right? Because there would be a need for people in the Netherlands to hear from their leader, like, we condone this as genocide, for instance. But apparently there is no such need. And then the question is, why is there no need? Is it because the coverage of all these things has been lacking and has been influenced by the CCP?
Yeah, partly, yes, I think, yeah.
So then you that's quite a dystopian situation, right?
Oh, yeah, the only one standing against Red China is the US, I think, at this time.
Yeah, for the major powers, definitely. I mean, Japan will always be there and India will always be there, but on the global stage, the only one really acting against China, or seems to act against China, is the US.
So we will of course continue to make fun of Joe Biden, but let's not discount him completely, because
let's hope he knows what he's doing.
Yes.
In China. But it seems that he has copied, or at least not diverted from Trump's approach.
He has taken a lot of Trump's policy and has kept it in a similar way, definitely in the protectionism sphere. Biden is as hard on China as Trump.
And I think that's because it was a popular move within the US. So it's really, how much does the public want to see China punished for what they're doing, rather than how much do our leaders want to really act on it, I think.
Absolutely. The public is important, huh? And that's why these democratic institutions are very important. So I think that's also an issue politically here in Europe. We are deciding more and more on the European level, but the European level is still very, very undemocratic. I mean, you have a European Parliament, but it does not have a lot of powers to come up with new laws or to fire the European Commission. And then in the European Council, the voting is still anonymous. So we don't really know what our leaders are doing, and it has not been politicized at all.
No.
I think some small changes there could really help to also make the European politics more accountable. And there's also a large role there for the press and the civil society, I think, to be critical there as well.
Yeah, I think despite just being more accountable, it would also be more popular with the average voter. Because notoriously the EU elections always have a low turnout compared to other national elections. And it's also because people have no idea what's going to happen when they vote for a certain party. Like, they don't know about factions within the parliament of different parties from different
They're
nation
playing
states,
their own
right?
game on their square kilometer, and the rest of Europe is not following it.
Yeah, well, I mean, most people don't care for politics, and they will totally not care for politics so far away from home and so little covered on the news. The journalists also do not really understand what the commissions within the parliament are and when they're going to release certain papers or whatever. They only have the attention to do that on the national level, it seems. So I think that making the EC and the European Council more transparent would allow the media to cover it better, and to put on more juicy diversions divisions between certain member states than there is now. Because now it's just, we vote once every 4 years, and the rest just happens in Brussels.
Yeah.
Sometimes we hear some weird new policy where Poland is being ostracized or Hungary is being ostracized because they're not doing what we want, but nobody knows that what we want, how is it defined, where in the process.
In the political science terms, this used to be called permissive consensus.
Right.
So European voters would be just like, okay, just go ahead, do whatever you want.
Yeah, because we voted for this apparently. Right? Yeah.
But that permissive consensus is of course under threat. So I think it would be better to replace it with like a competitive, a democratic consensus rather than a permissive consensus. But, it's going to be a hard transition.
I think that would also be necessary if we would really want to be a federation like the US. You know, we have to know what interests are being played out against each other.
Well, unless we could be a federation like the People's Republic of China. I mean, that's
that's the two paths in an extreme sense. And one is more like the other at the moment. Right now we don't have the public competition as except for like a few outliers, which are then public enemy number one, like Poland or Hungary.
Yeah.
There's no talk about the camps within the council, and there are, of course. That's a fact.
Yeah.
But it's not public because they don't want to sow those seeds of conflict, maybe.
Yeah. But then if we would know about those lines, then we would know how to vote to influence the outcome.
Yeah.
And that's sort of part of the democratic game.
Yeah, it's been cut off. At beyond voting, there's just no more input that you receive as a citizen, which you should, in order to base your vote.
Yeah.
On good information and on relevant information. Most of that relevant information is just out of reach. Like the European Commission has so many research papers and stuff and policy papers, but they are hidden, right? Like most people will never ever go to a platform and look at it.
They are there, but you
can look at them, but
you need someone to summarize them and to
and you need someone to help navigate the archives, right, and the databases and such, and people aren't going to do that out of themselves. The majority aren't, so it has to be brought to them.
Yeah.
But now it's just obfuscated.
Yeah. So, but there are a lot of opportunities there to try to bridge the gap a bit.
Yeah.
So of course, I have the website fireofeurope.com where I also do close reads on some of those research papers. And it's incredibly interesting what you find. If you just take the time to read through them, or I looked at a speech by Lagarde at the IMF, and it's just so telling what they are talking about in that speech. That's really interesting. So if you haven't yet, please check it out. Anything else, other topics you wanted to talk about?
Maybe just a little bit about the labor market. Because as inflation is now becoming widespread and people are looking at the growing economy we have. So the GDP is slowly going up again, and people on paper, yes, and people have the opportunity to spend their money everywhere. And now we are hearing of labor shortages everywhere. Literally everywhere for dedicated
truck drivers.
Truck drivers, restaurants, healthcare. Also, financial firms have trouble, finding quality employees. So for everyone, the labor market's becoming more tight. I think that's going to be in the public eye the bad guy of inflation. So the inflation that's going to happen is going to be sold as something like, there were not enough laborers, so we had to increase wages, so we couldn't produce as much. So
but then the fact that we are growing on paper, that's also driven by the same inflation, right?
Yeah, well, it's spent, or it's calculated by the spending of everyone, and they're spending more for less.
Yeah.
So the GDP is increasing, but what's actually happening for welfare measurements is not. It's not increasing, it's decreasing even, because everything is becoming more expensive. And as people seem to realize now that the labor market shortage is going to be less than short, because I feel like a lot of people have just opted out. They have been either fired or they have been given less hours or less pay over the 2 years, and they've considered, how much is it worth to me to work? Can I do without? And if yes, should I? And I think a lot of people have answered yes to that question, which now that everything is supposed to be possible again is going to lead to huge problems. Because those truck drivers, for instance, was only about a few hundred that were short, but you can see the national crisis that it causes because it's such a delicate system where everything has to be there on time.
Just in time,
and there shouldn't be like 15 teddy bears if we only expect 10 teddy bears to be sold or something.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean,
but now it seems that there's too little people to even have 10 teddy bears, so there's only 5. And then everyone is going to want to pay more for one of those teddy bears.
In a free market, you would then expect wages to go up to attract people, to tempt people to come back into work.
Yeah, and they may do so, but that will drive inflation further. And I think like a lot of people will still opt out, and they will still not change their life again to start working. They may have thought like, well, it's also flimsy, and it can change so fast that I would rather not. And I don't think that's a bad decision at all.
Well, it depends on your personal situation, of course.
Yeah,
but where work isn't everything. That's absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think some work isn't everything.
That's also...
And people who are at an older age, and they're kind of just working because they always have for some hours, why shouldn't they be able to say no? While in our public discourse it's going to be attributed to inflation. Or, the inflation is going to be attributed to those people. And the same with in the US, where unvaccinated people, of course, are now being driven away by some companies.
Yes.
They will also, in their
also
reports,
in Italy and in
in Italy and in France, they will also, in all their figures, they will say, well, we lost unvaccinated workers, so we had to increase the prices. But they can never get those people back.
Yeah, so it's the fault of the unvaccinated people that they are not allowed back into work.
They are not working. I'm serious. That will be the argument in those areas in a few months.
I think you are once again ahead of the curve, but it is on the one hand, it's understandable what you're saying. On the other hand, it's really absurd. Yeah. Because the government is prohibiting people from carrying out their job because they don't want to be vaccinated, and then it's their fault.
But we're living in crazy times, of course.
Absolutely.
Where people don't want to think too much about that connection. Like, they don't have to point the fingers, but anyone can go on the news and say, well, there's a labor shortage. Maybe banning the laborers has something to do with it. If only they weren't banned, right? If only they took up their responsibility.
Exactly,
So,
exactly.
I think it's a catchy explanation, and that's going to be believed by many people.
Well, we're going to have to do something, because if we are going to be forced as an economy to raise wages, then of course the inflation is going to get kick-started even more. De Guindos, the vice president of the ECB, also warned of this. So it's a bit of a mixed feeling, because I discussed this with multiple people, also employees. They are employees in general. They're not my employees or anything, but they said but raising the wages, that might be like the only good part of this inflation, and then that is not going to happen. That's also unfair, So
and that's why we have to increase the interest rates, so that they can still have their savings and have another part of their income which also counters inflation. And the wage increase without increasing the interest rate is just going to lead to like gross spending.
Yes.
And it has to be spent. You increase in wages, but you have to spend it all. You can't save.
Oh, you can't save, yeah.
So the assets are just going to
skyrocket,
go dry.
More and,
but like personal savings, that's going to disappear.
Yeah.
Because it's like a two-front attack now, and that's really unique. Because there's never been 6% inflation and negative interest rates. Yeah. Like, that's so weird.
That's funny. Yeah, it's like okay, but let's pump it up even more.
Yeah, let's pump it up because we don't want to default or something.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's great.
Interesting times.
Very interesting. So I'm going to upload this podcast again to the YouTube, and I'm also working on being able to upload it as well to Spotify and Apple. Then I have to put it on my website and create like an RSS plugin.
Right.
So I'm just toying around a lot with it. So some time ago I added the comment functionality, and then I also updated the way that the URLs are made. So I'm slowly
piece by piece.
Piece by piece, I'm assembling the enormous weapon which will bring down the status quo. So
right.
So please
you have my sword.
Yeah. Thank you, Aragorn. So let's leave it at that. Thank you very much, Ferdi.
Yeah, thank you as well, and to everyone listening, see you next time.
Yes, stay sane.
赵亮，
到。白箭头，到。
我们已经习惯达到。
王局，到。专利动员大会现在开始。
一声到，是一句承诺。
军长同志，营房前准备完毕，请指示。什么？战。
一声到，是一种割舍。一声到，是一次重塑。
海上、空中、陆上各作战机组已兴定完善作战计划。
一声到，是一场冲锋。我们用生命扛起使命，我们用忠诚筑起长城。改革强军，征途如虹。
历史告诉我们，改革创新与时俱进，是人民军队不断发展的康庄大道。人民军队的力量来自改革